Welcome to the U.S. Eagle Claw YouTube channel. Russia's war in Ukraine is dragging the Russian army, the Russian people, and the Russian economy to the bottom. While the air in Russia heats up with the fire of war, Putin's important allies who provide soldiers to the Russian army are shocked by the defeat in Ukraine. While it has been reported that Russian soldier losses have approached 100,000 since the war that started on February 24th, the mass destruction of the troops sent by Putin's allies to the region puts them in a difficult position. Buryatians, Siberians, Dagestanis, and Chechens are the autonomous regions where the Russian army's troop source comes from, and the mobilization that joins the Russian army from here are disappearing in Ukraine in the mission of cannon fodder. Kadyrovites are arguably the biggest among these allied resources in the Russian army, and at least 30,000 Kadyrovite Chechens have been sent to Ukraine to this day. After the failure of Russia's siege of Kiev, Chechnya leader Ramzan Kadyrov, who played an active role in the Ukrainian war, always stood by Putin in this war and sent tens of thousands of soldiers from his own country to the front line in Ukraine. Putin, who wanted to benefit from the superior fighting skills of the Chechen warriors, accepted this offer with pleasure. But some of the first battalions that went to Ukraine as they reached Ukraine joined the ranks of the Ukrainian armed forces. The next one was used as cannon fodder by the Russian army. These losses of the first months of the war could somehow be obscured. However, at this point, neither the Kremlin nor Kadyrov can cover up the losses. Kadyrovite Chechens under the command of Kadyrov had achieved outstanding success on the Eastern Front until the first part of the war. That is, until April 15, 2022. Second stage between April 15 and June 29, the Kadyrovites had achieved serious gains in Severodonetsk and Donbass and carried the Russian army. However, with the sinking of the Moscow flagship on April 15 and the liberation of Snake Island from June 29 to July 1, the Russian army entered a period of complete collapse, and the Ukrainian armed forces, along with the Free Chechens fighting on their side, destroyed Kadyrov's home bases and troops first in Donetsk and Luhansk and later in Kherson. Ukrainian HIMARS units destroyed Kadyrov bases one by one and destroyed thousands of Kadyrovites. In the recent Kherson offensive, the destruction of Kadyrov's base in Kherson was the last major blow to Kadyrov, and Kadyrov had to accept his losses in his last statement. And this caused a serious indignation in Chechnya, because Chechens have long criticized Kadyrov for supporting Putin. Ramzan Kadyrov, the ruler of the Russian Republic of Chechnya, admitted that the Ukrainian troops suffered high losses in their ranks after the artillery fire. As a result of the successful operations of the Ukrainian armed forces, it is stated that the losses of the Kadyrovite Chechen fighters who fought for Kadyrov are already over 15,000. After the Ukrainian army's last successful offensive in Kherson, Kadyrov posted on the Telegram channel late on Thursday. 23 fighters were killed and 58 wounded. Earlier this week, Ukrainian soldiers reported that a Chechen unit in the Kherson region in southern Ukraine disclosed its location with photos on social networks and was hit by artillery fire as a result. Normally, Russian authorities do not publish figures for their own casualties. In this case, Kadyrov may be challenging the even higher figures given by the Ukrainian side. Earlier this week, Ukrainian sources reported that a Chechen unit in the Kherson region in southern Ukraine disclosed its location with photos on social networks and was hit by artillery fire as a result. Kadyrov's comments were unusual given that pro-Moscow forces rarely admitted to having suffered large losses on the battlefield, and Russian officials did not publish figures on their own casualties. The Chechen leader also urged his compatriots to mobilize for the war in Ukraine. However, harsh words were spoken against Kadyrov in the face of this call. Chechnya's free spirits are now reacting more harshly to their own leaders, and Chechnya is plunged into serious chaos. Since the start of the Russian war more than 9 months ago, Kadyrov has stood out as one of the most ardent supporters of the conflict, sending his own troops to Ukraine as well. He often criticized the leadership of the Russian army, together with the financier of the mercenary Wagner units, Evgeny Prigozhin, for being too soft. Kadyrov also called for the use of nuclear weapons against Ukraine. But the most contrary move to the Chechen leader came from the Ukrainian parliament. In a vote, the Ukrainian parliament approved the declaration of the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria as temporarily under Russian occupation. a decision that will certainly anger Moscow, which has adopted a zero-tolerance line for any discourse of separatism within its borders. Ichkeria is the historical name for Chechnya, Russia's southern region devastated by two bloody wars between Russian troops and Chechen separatists after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. The Muslim-majority region is now headed by Ramazan Kadyrov, a devastated former warlord who now describes himself as President Vladimir Putin's infantryman, backed by the Kremlin and providing massive financial support to Chechnya. Kadyrov emerged as one of Russia's most outspoken hawks during the 8-month war in Ukraine that killed tens of thousands, displaced millions, and razed towns and cities. The majority of Ukrainian deputies voted to support a resolution recognizing the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria as a territory temporarily occupied by the Russian Federation, in violation of the UN Charter. Ukraine uses the same language to describe Ukrainian territory captured by Russian forces in 2014, and after this year's invasion. The deputies' resolution condemned Russia's war crimes committed in the two Chechen wars after the collapse of the Soviet Union and other historical crimes committed in the 19th and 20th centuries. In addition to these developments, Russia, which retreated and lost in Ukraine with each passing day, demanded that the Western states accept Russia's annexation in Ukraine in order to end the war in its negotiations with the West. Germany called for peace talks, but Moscow said that the West must accept annexations. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz urged Russian President Vladimir Putin to find a diplomatic solution to the Ukraine conflict as soon as possible, including the withdrawal of Russian troops during a speech by the two leaders recently. The Kremlin said Putin told Scholz that the German Western line in Ukraine was destructive and urged Berlin to rethink its approach. Although Moscow and Washington have said they are open to negotiations in principle over the past 24 hours, the reading of the call served to highlight the gulf between Russia and Western governments over Ukraine, Reuters reported. The Kremlin said the destructive line of Western states, including Germany, which pumped weapons into the Kiev regime and trained the Ukrainian army, was pointed out. On top of all of this, extensive political and financial support for Ukraine causes Kiev to completely reject any idea of negotiation. Kiev said peace talks are possible only if Russia stops attacking Ukrainian territory and withdraws its troops from Ukrainian territory. The Kremlin has stated that it wants a diplomatic solution and claimed that Putin was always open to negotiations, but said it was complicated by Washington's refusal to recognize new territories as Russia blocked any potential reconciliation seeking. Separately, a German government spokesperson confirmed that Berlin is not in talks with Ukraine on the transfer or deployment of Patriot air defense systems to Ukraine. Germany reportedly offered Poland the Patriot system to help secure its airspace after a stray missile crashed and killed 2 people last month. Polish Defense Minister Mariusz Błaszczak later asked Germany to send fire departments to Ukraine instead. At the same time, Russia said on Friday that the West is demanding its complete withdrawal from Ukraine as part of any future negotiations to end the war, effectively excluding such negotiations as Russian strikes continue, and a Ukrainian official determined his country's war losses. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov reiterated that Russian President Vladimir Putin is open to negotiations, but the West's demand that Moscow withdraw its troops from Ukraine first is unacceptable. On Thursday, U.S. President Joe Biden also indicated that he would be willing to talk with Putin if he showed he wanted to seriously end the occupation and withdraw from Ukraine. After a phone call by the Kremlin with Scholz, Putin accused the West of encouraging Ukraine to prolong the war by supplying weapons. Putin also said the recent crippling Russian attacks on Ukraine's infrastructure were, quote, forced and inevitable, after Ukraine bombed a key bridge and power facilities on the Crimean Peninsula that Russia seized from Ukraine in 2014. Russian forces have been bombing Ukraine's critical infrastructure since October, leaving millions without electricity in the cold winter weather. Scholz's office said in a phone call with Putin that it condemned particularly Russian airstrikes on civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, and that Germany was determined to continue helping Ukraine defend itself. The Ukrainian General Staff said on Friday that Russian forces continued rocket attacks on infrastructure and airstrikes on Ukrainian troops along the line of contact, adding that Moscow's military offensive was focused on a dozen towns, including Bakhmut and Avdiivka, key Russian targets in the warring east. A senior advisor to Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said 10,000 to 13,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed in action since Russia's invasion on February 24th, citing military chiefs. It was a rare comment on Ukraine's military losses and was well below Western leaders' estimates. Considering these developments in general terms, the president of Russia and his allies continue to be concerned more and more every day. But Vladimir Putin does not seem to have any intention of giving up the war. This situation will cause the Russian army to suffer much heavier losses, and an international instability will continue. Thanks for watching us.